Adventures in Imperfect Living.
Greetings, folks. Welcome to the program. I'm Greg Willits from RosaryArmy.com.
And I'm Jennifer Willits, his wife.
This is a show that's been a few months in the works. Excited to share this with you with Matt Swaim. Matt was our host when we went to Columbus, Ohio at the beginning of the year to film an episode of The Journey Home with the Coming Home Network on EWTN. And depending on when you're watching this, if it's before April 15th, 2024 at 8 p.m., then you could watch it live when it airs on EWTN. And if you're watching afterwards, there'll be links to where you can see the show and some of the other content that they're going to be producing from our time there. But Matt, not only is he behind the scenes helping to bring everything together for the Coming Home Network, but he is a radio host in his own right. He's the host of the Sunrise Morning Show. And we met him back when he was the producer of it years and years ago. We talk a little bit about that. And we've just developed a friendship over the years. And that's very much what this conversation feels like. It's talking about just the Catholic world in general, talking about our faith journeys, both as converts, reverts, and whatever verts that brought us into the faith, and why we're Catholic, and some of the weirdness of working in Catholic media in general. And it's interesting how our conversation just ebbs and flows from one topic to the next, and didn't even try to control it. At one point, I was like, this is just how it is every time we talk to Matt. It's always a joy. And he is just someone who we greatly appreciate being in our lives. And so we're glad to share a conversation with him, sort of as a build-up to us being on the Coming Home Network. And we think you're going to love it. If you're not familiar with Matt Swaim, his radio show, you can listen to every morning on EWTN radio. And you can see his work from behind the scenes on the Coming Home Network. Again, Journey Home is every Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on EWTN. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as we did with our good friend, Matt Swaim. All right, Matt, I've been trying to figure this out. How long have we known each other?
I was about to ask you that. I'm not entirely sure.
Like, I don't remember when we got on each other's radar.
It feels like 10 years.
Oh, longer than that.
Oh, it's longer than 10 years.
Well, see, I only said that to help get you guys thinking about it.
You only said that so we would disagree with you.
Yes, because I love that.
As a flex. I think I want to say like at least 15.
Yeah.
I want to say at least probably like maybe 2009-ish.
So what would have made us cross paths in the first place? Because in 2009, so we were doing our radio show. You were doing Sunrise Morning Show.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't yet gone to Cincinnati to do the audiobook. So something was going on, because that's when we met in person for the first time. You came over to Servant Press, Francisca Media, and so we got to meet in person, and that was the first time. And I think that was like 2010 or 11. So
yeah, so I would have the reason I would have come across you is because I was putting the Sunrise Morning Show together. Myself and Brian Patrick were like coming up with the notes for like what we even wanted the radio show to look like, and we wanted it to look like an actual morning show where you've got like, like you would hear on another channel where you've got like a whole bunch of different guests and a whole bunch of different segments. I was like, well, we should do that. And then I realized that if I'm going to do that, I need to Google like every single Catholic person who's ever done anything into a microphone. And I think that I must have run across you and maybe lurked on you through SQPN or something. I'm not sure when you got involved with them.
Yeah.
It's almost certainly before you guys got involved with full on. Well, actually, I don't know if you were on the Catholic channel.
Well, if you were lurking,
it was early
because of SQPN. So we helped found that in 2005. So
it would have probably been that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it for me, it was definitely I was confused when I would be on the Sunrise Morning Show before you were hosting and Brian was hosting it. And I felt like all of my communication with you was just like, I could tell that there was like this, I mean, this sounds hokey, but like a kindred spirit. I get this guy. I'm excited for this. And then I would go on and it would be like this rapid fire, what the heck just happened? And I'd hang up and I'd be like, I think I was just interviewed. But, and then I was like, I want to talk to the other guy who likes Star Wars and Catholicism too. And it's like, where's that was the connection I felt.
The kids say game recognized game. It's funny because in the years of development of trying to figure all this out. I mean, we're in this free flowing Jazz Odyssey podcast world, but live radio, man, you gotta chop. You've done that too, right? The hard break is hard break waits for no one.
I remember
And just the amount of stuff.
And when we went to radio, I remember a friend of ours, Captain Jeff. I love his honesty, and he was involved with SQPN, and he flat out told me, I don't listen to the radio show because it's just not the same. And he liked the podcast, he liked the conversation, he liked that kind of flow, and it can be a very jarring thing.
It's a different discipline.
Yeah,
discipline.
And so you did a show this morning, right?
Oh, I did.
Yeah, and you do a show every weekday morning. It's like 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in and do that.
Hour, so you have like 3.
Yeah, you have to do that rapid fire thing, every single day. How do you balance that? Because when you have these conversations, then you go to Coming Home Network, they all seem to be longer form and more thoughtful. But then it's like I had a hard time bouncing back and forth between the question, and it's like, well, tell me what you think, and take your time and think, and the answer.
Yeah. So this is where I'm very grateful for kind of my formation, because I actually went to school for this stuff. Yeah. And interestingly enough, because I went to Asbury College, which is now Asbury University, and I went in wanting to do radio, and everybody else is like, "You're an idiot. Radio, satellite radio is going to eliminate, all terrestrial radio by like 2005," which I think is probably when you guys were getting into, the satellite radio world, right? To crush the terrestrial station. And it turns out we're all still here. But the theory, the principle, because we didn't really get trained so much on equipment. I mean, we got trained on equipment, but a lot of it is like, what does it mean to communicate? And the two things you always got to know is your audience and your purpose. And really studying some like media theory types of people like Marshall McLuhan and Malcolm Muggeridge and some of those folks who talk about like the idea of how certain types of media communicate things in different kinds of ways. So like, for instance, if you're doing a newspaper, you put your most important stuff above the fold, right? Nobody even like thinks about that because people don't get the newspaper. But like, if you want somebody to notice it, you have it in the first half because they fold the paper up, right? Yeah. And it's similar with podcasts. Like, that somebody who's coming to listen to a podcast is listening because they want to settle in. Morning radio, that somebody's listening because they've got a 20-minute window and they need to know as many different kinds of things as possible before they go on with their day. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of adjustment. I can tell you that it's taken a while. I mean, it took a while to get comfortable in it, but one of the things that in radio you don't have time to do that you have time to do in other formats is you can be like, well, here's our guest. They have their degree in undergrad from such and such university. They went on to get a master's and then a doctorate. They're the author of 17 different books, including this and this and this and this. They have 5 children and they live with a dog and some cats on this farm. You can't do that, right? Yeah. You could just be like, we're talking today with the author of blank. Welcome to the show. So, and then the other thing that I learned, and I'd be very interested in you guys' take on this and your experience of this, because you did a lot of this on the radio, is that if you get somebody who has got like a book or something and they're doing a lot of kinds of shows, often the publisher or whoever's promoting it will send you a list of like suggested questions. Yeah. And I started taking that as like a challenge. Like, I'm going to refuse to ask any of these questions. So I'm just going to come up with something that is 100% not on the sheet. And I found that like people are kind of like 1 out of 100 will be thrown by that. The other 99 are usually relieved by that, because they actually get to say something that's not like packaged or scripted. So
it's sort of like the thing that pops in my mind, because I think we do the same thing. We try to not ask the standard questions, and we hear that from a lot of the people that are on the show. Was like, wow, that was actually fun. Which is, well, it's not to say that we're the only fun show out there, but it makes me think about.
But you want to be one of them.
we want to be one of them, and we want the takeaway to be different. I think about when Scott Hahn was on the show once, and we went off on a tangent on frisbee golf. That was the thing that he was like totally into frisbee golf, and I'm like, breaking news: Scott Hahn plays frisbee golf. We're going to milk this story for all we, and it was so weird that it was great. And it's the weird stuff, and that's why I like being on your show, because I tell you, you and Lino Rulli both make me incredibly nervous when I'm being interviewed by either one of you, because
you have no idea what's coming.
I have no idea what's coming, and it's like the possibility of looking either like I am just the most knowledgeable person in the world or a total idiot. It's like it's a balance. Whatever question you ask is like, if I don't know it, I better be able to spin it quickly into something funny, or else it's gonna, ruin the show. But it's
Gonna
something.
ruin the show.
Yeah, it's something that I always.
Are you saying it's a double-edged sword?
It's a double-edged
Or
sword.
I'm sorry.
It's like,
I'm sorry. Are you saying it's a double-bladed lightsaber?
See, you told me he was going to work at least one Star Wars thing in here. He was going to get it in one way or the other. What about you, Jennifer? I mean, when we had all those guests on the program, what were your thoughts about asking the questions? Do you even remember? It's been so long.
Well, whenever we deal with an author, my role in interviewing is actually to be as sharp of a listener as I can, so I can keep the conversation as organic as I can. And a lot of times in the listening, that's where I form my questions on the spot. And yeah, I appreciate the template of questions that the publisher provides, because at least it lets me know what the author is prepared to talk about. But I find it to be more interesting let's talk about the story behind the story, and that the book is simply just referenced to rather than dissected in the context of the interview, because then if we've given too much away, then the audience has all that they need, and there's no reason to even purchase the book, but we have to leave them wanting more. And sometimes when you really just get to know the author and really introduce the author to the audience, I find that they will like the author and therefore will want to see what they have to say in that book. So that's my strategy. I developed that on the fly.
Well, I was just reminded, one of the things, we weren't trained like you were. And I mean, you had the opportunity of actually, going and learning the skill of communicating. And we were doing podcasting, which we never intended to do. And then SiriusXM came knocking, and we never intended to do a daily radio show. And so a lot of the things that we've done, we've stumbled into, so we had to learn on the fly. But the idea of how do we make this interesting? One of the first guests that we ever had on the radio, you know how it is. You get all these books sent from all over the place. It's like, oh, that one looks interesting. That one doesn't look interesting. And so you have the guests on that you think are going to have written something that might interest you. And the guest showed up on our program, and we asked them, well, tell us about the book. And this is the worst question, but it's what all radio
Tell
people
us about the book.
Yeah, tell us about the book and how
Right.
it came about, right? The guy said, well, let me read to you what it says on the back cover. And he proceeded on live radio to read the back cover. And we're just sitting there trying to figure out how do we stop this? How do we interrupt? How do we? And I remember thinking, I never want to experience that ever again for the rest of my life, where someone just takes his own book and starts going, this book is one of the best books that I have ever,
And that's when we learned that not all authors are necessarily good public speakers, and that we needed to do a little extra vetting and look for any evidence of how they carry themselves in an interview, how well they can expand on a point. And that was kind of a newer change in our methodology, was to just try to gain that insight ahead of time, because one, we don't want to make the author look bad. So we're kind of looking out for them. But the publisher will often just send us everything, vetted or not. This is the author, and they have no idea how their public speaking skills actually are. So we really,
I don't think they care.
Yeah,
you think they care?
I don't know that they care, but also I think that if you're the right kind of person, like, you can figure out. Like, sometimes I get invited. I've done this a few times over the years, where like a 5th grade class will be having to like interview a grandparent or something for like a project.
So they ask you.
They're like, one of the dads is an interviewer. Why don't you come in and tell people how to do interviews? And so the thing that I tell kids is, like, you just got to find out what kind of nerd somebody is.
Yeah.
And once you find out what kind of a nerd they are, then you can ask about this. And this is something that even as a dad, I try and think about this, because a kid has like the 3 or 4 things they fixate on that are like fascinating to them. And what you want to raise your children to be, what you hope that you are, is the kind of person who could have a conversation with almost anybody.
Yeah.
Who, after about a minute and a half of hanging out with somebody, you can come up with a series of questions or a series of prompts in the conversation that allows you to like establish like where the connection is. So where the bell will go off, as it were. But like the idea that you can find out, it's really a humanizing thing for that other person, not just on the broadcast situation, but to be like with a stranger on an airplane, and within a minute and a half be able to like get that person to open up about something that they're interested in. That's like a real skill.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm there, but I'm saying that like it's helpful. not just for like broadcast, but for just like being a human being, to just know like how to find that somebody.
In your line of work and in ours, I think we've all come to realize everyone has a story, whether they know how to share
Absolutely.
it, but they've got it. And once you discover what their currency is or their nerdship origin story, they can at least tell you that first moment when they discovered that love of that thing and how it makes them feel when they are engaged with the love of that thing. And that becomes the beginning of a story. And so I think you do it so well because of your work with the Journey Home, first of all, and because that's your
Yeah.
business is pulling that out, pulling that narrative out of your guest.
Well, it's actually not my job. That's actually John Mark's job,
Oh.
because I can't remember if I told you this or not. I give him like very few notes, and that's actually on purpose. And it goes back to Marcus,
Okay.
and sort of understanding the role of the host in that situation, because we want, we don't want. I mean, John Mark needs to know like if you're married, so he doesn't say something about like a weird marriage situation, or like he needs to know a couple things like that, and he wants to know like what you used to be before you became Catholic, like in vague senses. But there is also this sense that like he also wants to be a little surprised, so he has to actively listen in the course of this, because you know how it is if you like tell a joke at a party and like your buddy's like, "Hey, Greg, why don't you tell the rest of the room that joke you just
I
told
hate
me?"
that. I
Like
hate
it bombs, and like it's the
that.
worst, right?
I hate that
So
so
we
much.
want the conversation to be genuine and not rehearsed. So like that's kind of on purpose that like I know the story, but like I know which parts to like tell John Mark, but if I know there's a cool surprise, I don't tell him,
Well,
right?
we're,
Because I want
Wow.
that to like be real.
we're doing a little inside baseball. So let's talk
Yeah.
about it, because we've been mentioning to our audience that we're going to be on the Journey Home, hosted by John Mark Grodi. Before that, it was hosted by Marcus Grodi, his father. For the people who aren't
Right.
familiar with it, it's on EWTN, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. But tell us a little bit about. Well, I'm really curious. I mean, explain Journey Home and the Coming Home Network, and then we'll get to how did you get involved in it in the first place? Because you were already doing all the
Sure.
other stuff. At some point, what was the handshake that brought you over to do that as well? But tell us about Journey Home.
Yeah, so the cliff notes of it is that back in 1993, Marcus Grodi, who'd been a Presbyterian pastor, felt convicted to enter the Catholic Church, and that meant he'd lose his job. That meant his social network would collapse. That meant that it was just going to be real awkward next time they had the ecumenical golf scramble. It meant that his mom couldn't roll around bragging about her son being a preacher. All kinds of these implications. And he was like, "Well, I'm the only person who's ever done this." Well, it turns out that he's not the only person who's ever done this, and he begins to find a few people like himself, and decides, what if we had a support system for these pastors?
Mm.
And so in 1993, he starts the Coming Home Network. Mother Angelica finds out about this through, I think, Johnette Bankovic, when she invites him on to tell his story. And Mother Angelica's like, "Well, why don't you? We should have a show where people just tell their conversion stories." And Marcus is like, "Yeah, that's a cool idea." Well, it turns out she wasn't like spitballing. Like she was. This is actually like a pitch, right? So it becomes a show in 1997, and it starts off with first guest ever is Thomas Howard, who was working at Gordon College, Presbyterian school, a reform school in the Northeast, and got fired for becoming Catholic. Is the first guest. And so from there, lots of pastors, but also lots of lay people, also people who weren't even Christians before, also people who were Catholics but that left and came back, which of course I'm not going to spoil y'all's story, but there's elements of that as well. So there's this cool opportunity. The idea being, well, the first idea in Mother Angelica's mind is that she got so many letters and calls from people who were like, "I'm so sad that my kids don't go to mass anymore, that my family doesn't care. Like, I'm the only Catholic in my family who cares." And she's like, "Well, maybe if people hear stories of how people wrestled with this and sort of their way back in, or sort of their way into the church from somewhere else, it might give people hope to not quit praying." So that's kind of been the ethos of it, and it's just sort of grown and grown. I mean,
And it's a completely
1997
separate
to the
thing.
present day.
It's on EWTN, but separate from EWTN. It's its own nonprofit, correct?
Yeah. So the Coming Home, this is where we get into the semantics. So like the Coming Home Network is the apostolate Marcus Grodi founded. EWTN started a show called The Journey Home so that we could take some of these people that we'd met and worked with and share their stories of sort of like the quote unquote finished product. Although the product is never finished, right?
Yeah,
The
right.
product is never finished.
Yeah.
So it's a cool little partnership that television show is sort of like the piece of the thing that we do with EWTN. But for the most part, it's all kind of behind the scenes, work with people, talking to people, praying with people, helping people meet each other, so that if some Baptist who's freaking out comes to us, we can be like, you're a Baptist from Kansas? You should talk to this other guy from Kansas who's a Baptist who became a Catholic. Like that kind of thing is a lot of,
I think
it's a lot of like behind the scenes.
The fact that a partnership has lasted as long as it has between Coming Home Network and EWTN, that's pretty phenomenal in and of itself, because you would think that would be something the devil would have gone to work right away at chipping away.
Yeah.
That partnership that has been there. What do you think can be attributed to its longstanding success and staying together like that?
Well, hot takes. I think one is a sense of trust that we're not going to put heretics on the show, so they don't have to worry about worry about the show, that we're going to have somebody who's like, and that's when I realized the Trinity doesn't matter, that it just, we're not going to put people like that on the show. So there's an element of trust. I think also the humility of Marcus, just his sort of self-effacing willingness to step out of the way and let it be about the guest instead of about him. I mean, it's a real credit to the tone that he set by setting the whole thing up. And also just there's not a lot of meddling. Like the track record is there, and there's a sense that like we have a deep gratitude for the opportunity to have that platform, and they have a deep gratitude for us for doing sort of like the research and working with people along the way. And it's just it's like I don't know, it's like if you had to explain to your kids how to do the dishes every night, well, maybe you do, but like if you have like a system, like a routine, like a method, like you don't have to like constantly explain the thing over and over again. And I think that's been really a big part of it.
I would think there'd be a comfort there, right? I mean, there's a comfort that's been
There
established.
is.
You don't mess with that, and you just cultivate it.
So how did you get sucked into this work?
Caught in the tractor beam, as it were.
The vortex.
Yeah. So
he's gonna keep.
Yes,
so,
I see that.
He's gonna keep throwing in the Star Wars references.
You walked into that.
Okay.
You were dragged into that.
Yeah.
So it turns out that in order to book a radio show with 4 guests an hour, a couple of hours a day, you need to talk to the people who are probably most active in putting things into the world. And turns out a lot of those are evangelicals who still have that evangelical energy, who then became Catholic and are trying to figure out places to plug in. So I was, from the beginning of my days in the Sunrise Morning Show, which started in 2007, constantly in the orbit of these people who had either been on the journey home or would end up on the journey home later on down the road, and who were, also writing their conversion stories up for the Coming Home Network newsletter. There's just this orbit, that was, lots of overlap. And in 2015, 2016, I was getting a little burned out on radio, because getting up at 3:00 in the morning is hard for morning radio. And I was just looking for something. And it was around that time that the Coming Home Network reached out to me. It's like, hey, we know you know a lot of people. Do you know anybody that might be good for like a communications, position? I was like, it's funny you should ask that. So it just kind of worked out. And I was doing that sort of exclusively for a little bit until my radio co-host Annie got pregnant with another baby, and there was some maternity leave that needed to be covered. And so I went back, and then I ended up just sort of kind of staying on, and I figured out kind of a system to make it work. There's like it's an unofficial pipeline. Like, you talk about how sometimes you can't tell if somebody's going to be a good interview or not. Well, I can test them out in a 7-minute audition on the morning show.
Is that what you do? I mean, do you feel like a lot of your guests, before they show up on Journey Home with John Mark, that you've already put them through like a little 7-minute audition on your show?
Some of them, and sometimes it's vice versa. Sometimes it's people that I meet through the Coming Home Network and that work, and then that person later on down the road comes out with a book, and you're like, man, this book on the virtues would make an awesome series. You should do this on the radio. So yeah, it kind of comes back and forth. Yeah. But that's and we've talked about this off air before. Like, that's kind of the cool thing about when you can get past you know, some of the apostolate envy that goes on in Catholic media, where people are like, well, we got to have like the most hits, or we got to have the coolest guests. If you could start to like get that vibe of like, we're the body of Christ, and we got a leg over here that's, kicking butt, and like a hand over here that's like raised in service, and like you get a sense of how all the pieces kind of play in their own unique ways. Like it really is kind of like a liberating and exciting thing, to be like in your little cool little corner, because the morning show is its own cool little corner. Like we're just there to help you get ready for work. The apostolate is in its own little corner. It's like, we're there because you freaked out because you read something in the church fathers and you don't know how to tell your parents or your spouse or your church. Like knowing that that's like our spot is like really liberating.
Yeah.
So,
Well, one question I have about your work with The Journey Home is the audience. Do you think that the audience is largely Catholic or mixed with Protestants, like 50-50? Do you have any idea who actually watches it by percentage?
yeah. So the numbers, we don't have demographic numbers on. I can only give you anecdotal stuff.
Okay.
And I can only tell you, going back to the idea of what's your audience and what's your purpose.
Mhm.
Like a lot of people, when they say audience and purpose, would be like, my audience is everybody, and my purpose is just to like help everybody know about Catholicism. Like that's not good enough. Like
That's right.
you gotta pinpoint what you want to do and what you want to say. And so I think I might have even described this to you guys off the air. Like you think about like the biggest circle on a dartboard, the easiest one to hit, like the broadest, would be those Catholics who just want to hear a story of conversion, to know that they are indeed in the right church. And hearing these stories helps like affirm them in that. They may not even understand some of the arguments that this person sorted through, but it's affirming to them that this person is joining this church that they were born into. It helps them feel like I really am supposed to be here. I think a circle that's sort of smaller than that is someone who, and I don't want to spoil too much about your story, Jennifer, but like maybe somebody's got a neighbor or a relative who got involved in the kind of church that you were involved in, and they want to know like what makes this person tick and how they're thinking, so they can have a better conversation with them than they've been having. And then on the absolute like zeroed in, most pinpointed piece of our audience, the one that we're really always trying to talk to first and foremost, is that person who does come from the same background as the guest. So that if you got a Baptist pastor, you want that Baptist pastor to first and foremost not just be talking to Baptists, but be talking to Baptist pastors. Because it turns out that if a Baptist pastor who became Catholic speaks as though he's speaking to another Baptist pastor, you'll actually help the people who are trying to understand that kind of mindset understand it better. And you'll still help those Catholics, who are on the outside of the broadest part of the circle, who are just wanting to know that people really are joining.
In our case, then, when our show airs, then it's really to find that one other couple that has also done Catholic radio and Catholic podcasting, done a small Catholic ministry, and
There's a whole bunch of those.
And the wife belonged to like this weird cult type church thing, and then the husband was just sort of like this really wishy-washy Catholic. So it's like you found that one. Wait, we just made this episode for us, is what you're saying? Is because I can't imagine.
Yes, because okay. So here's the other thing that you need to understand. I mean, that you guys probably already do understand because you've been doing this for a long time. Like, this is not performative, right? We're not like grabbing you off the streets to prove that we're right about stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, actually, the person to whom this story is most important, the story of Greg and Jennifer Willits, is actually Greg and Jennifer Willits. Mm-hmm. Weirdly enough, that's going to sound crazy. Like, and we have to be, as an apostolate that's telling stories, at the service of that. Like, when I'm looking at bringing somebody on to share their story, one of the first things that I wanted to think about is like, does this person understand? Like, are they going to benefit from the telling of this? Because I know some people who want to tell their story who are not in a space where right now they would benefit from telling it. Like, there's some stuff that they don't need to be saying out loud yet, or some stuff they haven't processed well yet. And sure, it would fill an hour, but like, there's some things that got to work, in their life before they can really get out there. As a matter of fact, when famous people convert, people are always like, you should get this famous person on the show. I'm like, I want this person to like adjust to the light a little bit in the room. I don't want to go objectify them, treat them as a prop. Because ultimately, if we're a pastoral care ministry, that includes like exercising pastoral care towards the people we're putting on television. So I hope, by the way, I don't know if that actually came across when I had you guys in town, but that's the way I was trying to think about you all.
Well,
you
no,
know,
I
as
really
trying to prep you
appreciate
for
that. What surprised me was just how nervous I was on the days
Mm,
leading up to, because it's a
yeah.
question I don't get asked very often is, what is my story? How did I actually enter into the church? And what was all the stuff that preceded that moment? And so I realized that's a lot of life I have to now look at closely through my current adult eyes, and hopefully more wise than I was back then. And how,
Because it's easier just to say that, you came into full communion in 99 and I just started to take my faith more seriously.
yeah, very high level.
It's a lot easier just to say that, right?
But wow, I was very nervous. And then I started feeling sort of attacked spiritually. And the moments, now I'm inside the 24-hour period of time where this show is going to be recorded. My story is going to be told. And I had at least 10 different things, putting a lot of noise in my head and robbing me of all my peace, that now I had to devote energy and resources to reconciling each of those 10 different things. I'm literally sitting in the hotel room hours before we were going to meet and fighting tears and trying not to look like the most depressed person on the human planet. And I'm like, I guess this is part of it. This must mean something good is going to happen. This must mean I'm on the right track.
It was a fun
Well,
time. in
not
the
to
hotel,
spoil it,
let
but
me tell
something
you
good
that.
did happen.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is that I mentioned that John Mark doesn't know. He knows I filter some things through, so it can be genuine surprise. But there are things about your story that were completely unclear to me until we started talking, and until you really started. Because I think that often we get so used to talking to Catholics that it's easy just to say, "Well, I was a Protestant," and whatever. But for our audience, if we're trying to help somebody who's really looking for help and feels alone, by identifying it much more specifically and concretely, as you ended up doing, that tells somebody maybe there's a home in this place for me.
Mm.
And so you laugh about you guys' crazy, weird story and how, we're the one couple in the universe. I have a friend who at one point was working for a baseball team in the Midwest, a professional baseball team. He was a Lutheran deacon. He had a background in television. And one of the baseball players went up to the front office of the baseball team and was like, "Hey, we're having a team mass. You want to join us?" And this Lutheran deacon's like, "This 7-time All-Star just invited me to mass. What am I going to say? No." And so he goes to mass and has just an experience there that causes him to ask a lot of questions. And so he goes searching around, ends up on our website, finds the story of another guy who was a Lutheran deacon who had a television background who became Catholic. And he was like, so you never know. You never know. That's God is. I mean, God is in these cosmic realities, but he's also in these, as Norm Macdonald says, the devil is in the details, but so is God. Right? There's those weird little things are often where the weird graces come through.
Well, speaking about your website, because I don't want that to be a throwaway comment. When people get curious and they start searching and they wind up on your website, is there a way for them to search for people who are just like them? They can literally put in, I am this person with this
Jehovah's
background,
Witness.
search.
Yeah. So we don't have a complete Boolean search where you type in 17 things, but you can search by Baptists. You can search by pastors who became Catholic. You can search by, Hindus. You can, we haven't broken down by that and all kind of sort of tagged in a certain way.
Or atheist, agnostic, just one big bucket word type thing.
Right. And we actually, have been trying to work lately to try and split out atheists and agnostics, because those are really two different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's the person who's adamant that God does not exist. And the person's like, "I don't know, man." Those are two very different kinds of worldviews.
Yeah.
So, and often, who knows how many tags are going to end up on you guys' episode? There's a lot.
Well,
but we do have it.
Silver hair.
Search.
Yeah.
Is there room in the Catholic Church for curly-haired, silver, women? I don't know. Maybe. I think so. But you also have an interesting story. And I wonder, have you, in your line of work, have you ever seen a guest who had a very almost identical sort of origin as to you, someone from the punk rock world who is now I just want to read about dead people and be Catholic?
Okay, so I'm terrible about plugging things that I've been involved in, but I would encourage people to go check out an episode of Coming Home Network Presents that I did with Keith Nestor, who's a former Methodist pastor and youth minister, and Keith Little, who runs a podcast called The Cordial Catholic. He's in Canada. Turns out that we were all Christian punk and metalheads in youth group.
Wait, Keith
who all
Little?
had, like,
Keith Little was involved in punk?
yeah, yeah, oh yeah,
From
you
the
know Keith?
from the Cordial Catholic.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, he doesn't
world
seem as
view is
punk
just
rock because
completely
he's
changed.
Canadian.
Wow.
Because he's Canadian, he seems like a lot less edgy. So, but yeah, it turns out.
I don't know if I can move on. I mean, I might want to end the conversation at that point.
No, stop.
And just go call him.
Yeah, I'm
gonna call him and get the dish.
Okay, go ahead.
Continue.
So yeah, we all turns out used to go to this Christian punk and metal and alternative underground music festival on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. And as a matter of fact, you guys probably know the band POD because they had like major mainstream success. Turns out that Keith Nestor and I were in the same midnight tent show watching POD the night they announced they signed to Atlantic Records. And there's like I don't know, like 3,000 people in this tent. But we were both there. Neither one of us was Catholic. We were both working in like youth ministry types of things. And then later on, we both became Catholic. And later on, even than that, we met each other.
So have they been on your show?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely. We did a round table. Okay, so if you look it up, it's a series we do called Coming Home Network Presents. So if you go to chnetwork.org/presents, the title of the episode is, I believe, 90s underground music. No, yeah, 90s underground Christian music and Catholicism.
I mean, I'm just kind of blown away by that. Because we were on his show, I don't know, it's probably been about 2 or 3 years, but enjoyed the heck out of it. Yeah, on the Cordial Catholic.
Oh, he's a great guy.
And just, it was we did a long form conversation about the rosaries, and he's trying to understand Rosary Army, and that was the big focus of it. And it was just the nicest conversation, and I never would have pinpointed. And from listening to his podcast too, it's like I just never would have. I never would have gone there.
Let's just think for a second how hopeful this is. Like when you look at one lifestyle and how that one lifestyle can still lead to the beauty of the Catholic Church. And then, because many of those who listen to this program, they skew a little older, but have adult children who have left the faith. You know that story, and they are just worried that how is my kid going to end up here? I see the life that they are living right now. How do they go from that to this? And that's what we're in the business. You're in the business of helping show people it does happen. It does happen.
It's a mosaic.
Yeah.
It's a mosaic of grace. Like everybody's like a little, I mean, if you look at like a massive mosaic on like the dome of a cathedral, and you realize that this is like 100 bajillion little pieces of something, and each one, they all kind of come together to show you like this picture, this larger image. I mean, there's, it can be easy to sort of like have this sort of packed journalism idea of how people become Catholic. Like, they're a Protestant, then they read the Church Fathers, then Sola Scriptura goes away, then they become Catholic. And it happens that way to some people, but it never happens to two people the same exact way, even when it happens that track. I've known people who, I've known plenty of people for whom they believed every single thing that the church teaches, except for the way that the church teaches about the moral life and contraception. And like it get hung up for years on that question. I've known other people who didn't believe anything that the church taught about anything, but they believed that they were in line with what the church taught about contraception. And then that was the key that unlocked the door for them to even ask the questions about Mary and the Eucharist and all this other stuff, purgatory. I've known people who were never witnessed to anybody at all, witnessed to by anybody at all, right? But had a weird dream. I mean, there's 100 different ways. I mean, think about your own background, Jennifer. I mean, not to spoil it, but like somebody might look at where you came from and be like, nobody from this church would ever become Catholic, right? I mean,
right. And yet I actually did encounter one other Catholic family, and through conversations, I realized she shared the same background. Like she still had family members who were part of that particular religion. And she said, oh yeah, so we'll go over there, and just so I could still, kind of keep a connection with my family, I'll go over there. And then I still go to mass. And I was like, wait, how does that work? I was like, oh, okay. That kind of, rattled me a little bit because I couldn't understand how you could still kind of be in both because they're just so very different. But yes, so that's true. But I want to put that aside for a second and kind of circle back to what you were saying beforehand about how these people ultimately find their way into, the beauty of the Catholic Church, and how often is it as a result of something that the parents have done to bring that wayward child back. And that's something I wonder how often you come across that in your line of work. Have you ever heard of a guest who started out Catholic, left, and came back, and they came back because of something their parents did? Because I have a feeling that number is actually lower than...
It's really low.
Right. And
it's depressingly low.
That's what I thought.
Because... And it's for the same reason that a lot of our converts who come from other Protestant traditions have a very difficult time talking about their faith and sharing their faith with their parents from other faith traditions, is because isn't this the carpenter's son? Right? Like there's a prophet being without honor in their own country.
Yeah.
I mean, this is true in the lives of the saints too. I mean, think about Monica, like chasing St. Augustine all over the Mediterranean basin, trying to get him to like right his paths. And then one day Augustine like meets St. Ambrose and is just so impressed by him. He's like, man, maybe this is like something I ought to take seriously. And Monica's like, this is literally what I've been telling you this whole time,
Yeah.
So Monica's she's a big intercessor for our work, but it really is. You have to also, and I find this in lots and lots of different relationships. It's amazing how many different kinds of people I'm able to talk to, and I'm able to help with my story and my experience and the few things I picked up along the way. But it's also amazing how ineffective I am with people that I actually know. And how if somebody that I actually know asks me a question about something, I'm like Porky Pig. Like I got nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
I talk about that
So
all
you
the
have
time.
to
It's
trust
like
that somebody else.
Yeah.
my batting average for converting people that I actually want to convert is very, 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 very low. But go on a podcast and just say some random comment that I gave no thought to whatsoever, and someone's like, "Yep, we quit using contraception."
Oh, that's perfect. It makes it perfect. You're such a genius, Gregory Willits.
it's just I'm like, I don't even remember saying that thing. I can't even hardly take credit for it, let alone remember what I said. Yeah, and I that kind of leads to something I think about with you in particular, because you have such an interesting viewpoint. You literally are talking to Catholics every day that are doing stuff. How do you? Well, maybe the question should be: do you ever get jaded about Catholic media and the Catholic stories and the Catholic books and the Catholic stuff? Does that ever start to have a negative impact on you, and how do you fight against that?
Yeah. So I like to think that I've matured in this area over the past couple of decades, but I like to think a lot of things. So I think for me there is this. So just a tiny bit of background. Before I became Catholic, I was involved in Family Christian Stores at a Christian retailer. It was kind of like the Walmart of Christian bookstores through the 80s and 90s. It used to be Zondervan, and then it was Family Bookstore, and then it was Family Christian Store, and now it's gone.
Yep.
But I would work there during the era when VeggieTales hit, when the WWJD bracelets dropped, when, right after DC Talk released Jesus Freak, and Stephen Curtis Chapman is blowing up, and you've got the Prayer of Jade. You got all these things left behind. And I did get very cynical in that moment. And so coming back full circle, this is really what sent me into the Christian punk rock underground, if you must know.
Yeah.
But in that's also weirdly where I found the church fathers and all these dead people. And I'm like, I'm going to hang on to these dead people. They're not trying to sell me something, right? Justin Martin's not trying to sell me something. So this takes me to the Catholic Church. And when I came into the church in 2005, let's just say that slick marketing was not the Catholic Church's forte in that particular era.
Nope.
Right. It has since become a lot more that way. And I do reflect back on some of the lessons that I learned personally from being in that really polished Christian evangelical industry. And it has caused me to be really hesitant about getting involved in that kind of thing myself, being someone who sells stuff,
Yeah.
you know, a Jesus freak in the streets, handing tickets out for God, as Elton John might say. So, and sometimes, I look around and it's so easy to judge motives, but that's like literally the one thing that you can't judge, right? You can judge actions, but you can't tell like who's sincere, who's on a bandwagon, who's just doing this for clicks. I try not to worry about that stuff. I just know that God has planted me in a couple of like really kind of odd places, and I'm going to thrive there.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody else is there to do something else for somebody else. Like it's not my job to go around promoting the Rosary all the time. Like that's not a gift that I have. But for some reason, like some 20 odd years later, you guys are still doing that. So apparently, God has somebody else in mind for that particular thing. So I think that's sort of helped me.
It took us 20 years to finally accept it. So talk about, the branding and all the different things that people are doing. And we've talked about trying to sort of be okay with where we're at, also trying to do more at the same time. What are kind of your own personal hopes for like what work in the Catholic sphere would you like to be doing more of, or are you just are you good with where you're at for the indefinite future? Or do you still feel like, you've written the books and you've done the radio and you're behind the scenes with Coming Home Network and you're doing some of their video stuff for the website? Where do you want to go? What do you think is still needed? What's the gap that you feel like?
It's my 5-year plan.
Well, no,
it's my 10-year plan.
See, I hate that question, but you talked about it's like that God has.
Go see my journal.
Yeah. What's your exactly? What's your thing that you're supposed to be doing? What do you need to be focused on?
I don't know. Like I've thought about this, over time, and I'm like, should I be doing something more or something different or whatever? And I feel like if that ever happens, it'll be very clear to me because it just seems to me like God has opened up a lot of cool doors to meet a lot of cool people in this way. And I think, especially because there's just so much divisiveness out there in other forms of media. I mean, I think like when I was pondering what kind of media to get into as a young evangelical, just graduated out of college, and I'd seen some things, and had some internships and some other stuff, and just being like, man, I don't know if I want to get into this world. And just the freedom I have to not have to live in that divisive, sort of binary, political, toxic stuff, or have to, constantly be revving people up or whatever. Like to be in the story, I think that's a piece of the evangelistic picture, a piece of the testimonial picture that it requires more attention, right? And if other people start doing more of that, I won't complain because I really do think that that's a culture shift that needs to happen in the American church, especially because we get so sucked into a two-party system or like liturgical binaries or like, who is the real tribe within the tribe, and forget that we are pilgrims on a journey, as it were, that we're members of the body of Christ. So to the extent that I continue to be able to do that in these particular contexts, I'm not going anywhere. Right. I love this. And even just think about, we don't even remember how we met.
Yeah.
Like, because there's been sort of a thread of story that has kind of run through it all. Whereas if I was just trying to get something out of you and you were just trying to get something out of me and we were involved in purely like a sort of a transactional kind of world, I don't know, man. That's how people burn out. Right?
Yeah. Well, and there's been times where that almost happened. I think it was because I was focused on the wrong things.
I can absolutely testify to that.
Yeah.
Well,
in my
now,
own life.
okay, that's an interesting concept. The whole avoiding burnout. If you start feeling burnout, do you start questioning, is this time for me to move on? Because I'm feeling the burnout. Is this a sign that I've exhausted my role in this particular part of the field that we're all laborers in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I think part of it is that the devil wants us to kind of like all be sort of isolated on our own little islands and to get inside our own heads, and be in, sort of our own little pods. And that's like kind of the opposite of what Christ built when he built the church. So, I find that for me, and I wish I would remember this in the moment more, But I find that for me, it's very much like I know I need to go to confession right now, right? Like that's the kind of thing that's occurring to me more. Or, um, what's interesting, and Ignatius of Loyola has come up a couple times now, but he talks about the idea of spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation. Consolation being like when you really feel like what you're doing matters, and you're getting like you know, an emotional payoff for what you're doing. Like you're like, oh man, what a great day. We got like cool listener emails, like that kind of thing. And then there's the desolation where you said one phrase and you get one nasty email and it just ruins. Like people think like if you're a public figure, they can say anything to you, right? Because you're not even like a real person. And some people will just say something and they maybe think that I'm callous and don't care, but I read that thing and I'm like, oh no, everything I've done is worthless and a lie. Like I do read those things.
Do you get a lot of pushback?
Ignatius talks.
I mean, like from the Coming Network. I mean, from viewership, or do people?
Oh yeah, we published a Seventh-day Adventist journey to the Catholic faith, and the Adventists come out on and they just destroy us, right? And tell us that we're sucking people into hell, or like, people like, oh, you got somebody to join the Novus Ordo Church, or like it's anti-Semitic weirdness, or like, such and such talks too much. You got to tell them, whatever, that jacket looks stupid, or the stupidest things that people
do you
will get on
engage,
you about.
or do you just let them say what they're going to say and then you ignore them? What do you do? Because you're in the pastoral line of work, so even they have dignity. Even that person is on a journey.
They do, and they are, and so here's the thing: if I feel like I can say something fruitful into the situation, I engage.
Okay.
If I don't think that person is even interested in an actual conversation, if they're just like flaming me, I don't say anything. And it's taken me a long time to get to that point. But because you just want to fire back and be like, yeah, well, your mama, you want to fire back. And you just can't. And this is okay. So this is one other thing that people don't maybe understand about the Coming Home Network is that even though we're founded by a Presbyterian pastor and we help all these pastors from different traditions become Catholic, we're not coming down to Atlanta and flyer in the parsonages of every Protestant church in your town saying, hey, how come you're not Catholic? We only work with the people who are coming to us of their own free will, usually because they, it's like 2 a.m. and they can't sleep and they're like, can a Protestant pastor become Catholic? And they Google it and they find us. And that keeps us pretty doggone busy with the people who are taking a step in the direction. And we're there to kind of help with the next steps. And I think understanding that from the beginning and the way that Marcus set it up has been very liberating, because you're not walking out. There are people who are very gifted apologists. Like it's not as big of a thing anymore, but you guys remember like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, people would schedule public debates. I'm like, that's insane. I would die in that situation. Like kudos to those people who have that gift. I would be like laying awake and staring at the ceiling the whole night being like, I should have said this thing. I should have said that thing. Or like, oh, I think I lost tonight. And that's not the world we live in our particular apostolate. We only work with people who are they're on a trajectory. Who knows how far along they are. And that's sort of helped me, I think, understand like, what do I engage? What do I not engage? If this person is engaging me because they want to have a conversation and a dialogue, let's talk. If this person's just throwing shade, then I'm going to go stand in the sunlight.
So of all of your guests whose story was shared on April 15th, 2024, which one?
You guys were top two.
Which was your favorite?
You guys are definitely top two. We recorded 2 episodes that day.
Well,
actually, we only recorded the one that day.
Yeah, because because we had somebody else fall through. Yeah, well, I was going to say something else, but
we had somebody fall through, so we had to book you guys. So
we're the plan B.
Well, it was a great experience. I mean, like Jennifer said, I think it was surprising in that it made us both have to think about our pasts in ways that wasn't just superficial, and to be able to share that story in a way that was more meaningful. The thing that I thought, and this will sound like I'm being falsely modest, is part of it was like I didn't realize how much of Jennifer's story needed to be told. I kind of wish I wasn't there. That I felt I really felt like her story was is so unique, and we haven't shared that story a lot. We haven't gone into that detail.
Yeah, but you're a part of my story.
No, I understand.
A huge part of my story.
Right, no, but you could have told that part without me being there, is my point. It's like mine was like, yeah, and then I started taking my faith more seriously.
But here's the other thing. And so in terms of bonus material, we were able to get some stuff after the episode, especially with you, Jennifer, to talk about some of the nuances that I hadn't realized until you started talking on the actual episode. And even just your ability to speak from your own experience, like speak directly to someone who is perhaps going through right now that stuff that you were going through as like a teenager. And we got some bonus content. So, and that'll be on the Coming Home Network YouTube channel. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of those things because, you can't cover it all in 1 hour. You just can't.
Yeah. I mean, that was very much the case. I was sort of had this dialogue in my head at the airport, like, oh, did I really just say that? Or, oh, I should have said this. And you know what? I can't worry about it.
Can't worry about it.
Can't worry about it. It is what it is. And it came out the way that it came out. And there you go. That's the story.
For people that want to see both the episode as well as the bonus stuff that you're talking about, and the episode is originally scheduled to air April 15th. All of it will be available. How soon after it airs on EWTN is it available on the website?
It should go up on YouTube that night, and we'll create a page for it on our website with all the tags and that sort of thing, so it can be like organized by the very, very specific name of your denomination-ish, or your non-denomination that you were part of. Turns out that Jennifer and I thought we had more, but we have exactly one other person in the history of the Coming Home Network who's done a written testimony of their journey, who comes from the same exact kind of church that you come from.
It's crazy.
So now we have a category. We have a category for that where we just had a story before.
And she's going to be...
I helped establish a category. I feel honored.
You're going to get called out on the speaking circuit. You're going to be the expert for this now.
Oh, no.
I'm just saying all these things because these are things that she doesn't want. Talking about the branding of
okay,
God.
good. Well, then we'll make it happen.
Right. I don't like the
speaking
circuit.
If you say it out loud, then you just never know who's going to be like, man, I'm so glad somebody said that out loud. And maybe even somebody who's in that world right now and feels like they're in a weird headspace and that they're in groupthink. It's wild what the fruit can be.
Yeah, I can say in all truth that particular religion did in fact exist. It wasn't a fever dream. It was real. I was there.
Well, it did exist, and it is a bit of a fever dream. Yeah. So, I mean, it's both and.
Yeah.
Both and.
Well, as long as you like our show better than the episode that the Barons did, then that's all that we really care about. I think it's like it boils down.
No comment.
Matt, thank you for being here. Thanks for everything.
Yeah, thank you all for everything too, and thank you for your friendship over these many years. We don't get to talk, but every once in a while. But I've always felt like a kindred spirit with you all and what you do, even though we've never even been. We only kind of intersect with one another every few years. It always feels like, catching up with old friends every time I talk to you all.
And that's the best kind of friend to have, that you don't see them very often.
Yeah, the ones that doesn't bother you except every couple times a decade.
Low maintenance friends. Those are the best.
That's right. I love this.
Well, I'm proud of Matt. I mean, he worked in some Star Wars comics
several times.
Just like I knew he would, but I think he was controlling himself. He was pulling back. He definitely had control over the midichlorians that were in action during the course of the conversation. He was trying to just keep everything at bay. Docking Bay 94. And thank you very much to Matt for being on the program.
I mean, he definitely understands a lot about what we do, and we understand a lot about what he does. And it's just nice to be able to talk to a fellow kindred spirit, as Matt Swaim is. And we hope that you got a lot out of that conversation because it went in many twists and turns. Some of my favorite takeaways is when we can make it more personal to the stories that we all have and the value of sharing a good story. And also, I'm glad this came out because it was nice having a little affirmation from him about the parents' role in helping a child of theirs maybe find their way back to the faith, and just how that in many ways it feels like your hands are tied, but to look at the example of St. Monica and that you just become a more powerful intercessor in that child's life. And so that was one of my favorite takeaways, is to realize who we are in this, and especially in terms of having a child who has left the faith, because I know a lot of you are dealing with that same dynamic in your own family's life, and you want to do something good for them, and you're not sure what to do, but your powerful prayers mean a great deal, and praying about who your child will encounter in their life that will likely have an impact on helping them in their journey back to Christ.
Mm-hmm. So thanks again to Matt for being on the program. Thank you for joining us as well. If you would like some more resources to help you grow in your faith, make sure that you're checking out rosaryarmy.com and schoolofmary.com. We greatly appreciate all of the work that so many people are doing to grow in their faith and joining us over there on that platform.
And of course, don't forget to watch our show, which is hopefully coming out tonight or tomorrow, depending on when you're listening to this. By the time you hear it, it's already out there on the internet. This is our episode that we filmed with the Coming Home Network. And so we're excited that you finally get to watch the show that you've heard us talk about for the last couple of months since we filmed it.
Links will be, again, in the description, in the show notes, however you're watching this. If you look down below on YouTube, hopefully that link is there as well. Pray your rosary every single day.
And do whatever it takes to be holy.
Talk to you again in a few days. God bless, folks. Bye.